Welcome to Noble Warrior. My name is CK Lin. Noble Warriors, where I interview thought leaders about their journey from being a burnout overachiever to reclaiming the deep joy and purpose so we can learn from them and do the same. And this is a special series I'm doing with Burning Man Think Camp organizers. I'm really excited to have the founder of Playalchemist with me today. He's a serial entrepreneur. His holding company, Chrysalis, has 4 portfolio people-first software businesses: iQmetrix, Cova, Ready, and Shiftlab. He was the captain of the Canadian Taekwondo national team. He also produced the movie Milton's Secret. Please welcome Christopher Krywulak, also known as CK.
How you doing, CK?
I'm doing really good. It's so good to have another CK here on the podcast with me.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. So number one, I want to acknowledge you for introducing me and Sky Nelson Isaacs doing a virtual burn. You were the reason how we got connected. You don't know that, but I'm letting you know.
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. We actually did a talk together at the camp this year.
Oh, what was the talk about?
You could probably guess if you know Sky. We did. It was called Pleiadipity, the Science of Synchronicity.
So if you don't mind, let's going there a little bit more.
Yeah.
Playa is a place where synchronicities happen quite often. So since you talked to a physicist and you yourself are an alchemist, tell us a little bit about what you learned. Why is that the case?
Yeah, actually, a friend of mine recently started to label the Burning Man a synchronicity. Yeah, well, maybe I'll back up. Sky and I met, I think, a little over 10 years ago. And I had read Carl Jung's book, Synchronicity. And Jung was working with this physicist, Wolfgang Pauli, on understanding what are the causes of synchronicity. And I think, most of your viewers have heard of the term, but it's Jung described it as an acausal connecting principle. So when you have an experience that has meaning that has no causality, so it just kind of emerges and it seems really, and it comes up with meaning, that's a synchronicity. So I started to go to different science conferences, and then this is where I ran into Sky. And Sky, he was studying physics at the time, but his whole interest was synchronicity. So we really hit it off, and we've been friends ever since, and we talk pretty regularly. And and so Sky had reached out to me and he wanted to come back to Burning Man, and we started to discuss, the possibility of doing a talk. And it was actually kind of an emergent thing. We were just discussing it and discussing about all the synchronicities, and it was kind of obvious that we should do this talk together. So that's how it came.
So that was the origin, how Sky got to be there. I'm so curious, what's the content, right? What was the reason that you have deduced together why Playa is such a place where synchronicities, serendipities happen so frequently there? Yeah,
like many, we, that go to Burning Man, the synchronicity is off the charts. We and so we were exploring that I guess we explored the question, why is that? What are the causes of synchronicity? Is it the playa dust? Obviously, there's no way we can tell that it's conducive. But so we explored it from both a scientific perspective. Sky has written a book about synchronicity. He's explored potential principles rooted in quantum mechanics that show how synchronicities might happen. And I've been exploring my own experiments. I've done a lot of different experiments on trying to create synchronicity in my life, looking at the patterns, what happens at Burning Man. At Burning Man, there's almost this torrential flow. You can sort of feel this energy flowing around, and you can step into it. And then when you step into it, it takes you away, and all these synchronicities happen, and it's very magical. And then at the same time, you can step out of it. And so I was like experimenting with this and observing this, and yeah, we explored it from, again, a few angles. One angle that I was sharing is how important mind heart coherence is in a really healthy way. So that idea of really being whole and stepping into your kind of your deeper self, and not having any expectations, not having any judgments, and just sort of being present, which is a really subtle state to get to. And yeah, we talked for about an hour and a half on it, so we explored quite a few different angles. But yeah, I mean, we could go deeper into that today if you like.
I will love that. Maybe not the whole hour and a half content,
Yeah,
but
sure,
maybe just a high level, like, hey, here are the 3 points that you can get. Because part of the mythology of Burning Man is, oh, Burning Man is a very special place, and it is where synchronicities happen. And if I want to manifest certain things, I must go back to that location or that time of the year, with all the burners out there. But my point of view is Burning Man is amazing, and you get a glimpse of what's possible. Take that, what you learn, the insights, the lessons, so then bring it back to the default world, as we call it, right? The grand playa. And to me, that's where the work is. But yeah, I'm curious to know what lessons and insight that you have, deduced over there.
Yeah. Well, you clearly have had synchronicities on the playa.
I have.
Yeah. Have you learned anything that has cultivated more synchronicity in your life that you brought back from Burning Man? I'm curious to hear.
Let's see. If I think about it on the spot, I would say, a couple of things. One key lesson that I learned this year, that is, how Henry Thoreau said, most people live lives of quiet desperation. Yeah. Have you heard that before?
I've heard that quote. Yeah, I didn't.
Okay, great. Now, he didn't really get into the mechanics of what is it and how do you live life of quiet desperation. And the lesson that I learned this year is, well, if you're not clear about your intention, that leads to a life of quiet desperation. If you are clear about it, but if you don't express your desires, that leads to a life of quiet desperation. If you're clear about it, you express it, but you don't do anything about it, you don't make an effort. Or if you do all that and you're attached to the outcome, that leads to a life of quiet desperation. So, to do the opposite, in my mind, right? You have a clear intention, you express it to yourself and to another human being in a skillful way, and you make an effort to actualize, to manifest that intention, and also not being attached, as you alluded to earlier. To me, these are, not predictable, not deterministic, right? And then if you do these things, then you will create serendipity, synchronicity in the world. But I think the probabilistic outcome is a whole lot more and more magical. Your life is a lot more, quote unquote, magical if you can, hold on to those principles.
Yeah. No, that's great. It's really like knowing who you are and what you want, and that's almost makes up your paradigm, right? And how you show up in the world. And when and I would agree with that. Once you're clear on that, that increases your resonance, especially. And so when I was talking about coherence, it's bringing those together and unifying those 3 dimensions. And in alchemy, they have this, the triangle is represented by sulfur, and mercury. They all have, that's kind of the metaphorical, the salt is the body, you've got the spirit and the soul at the highest levels. And you go through the process of purifying.
Actually, quick question. What's the difference between spirit and soul in this case? Because in my mind, there's synonymous. So what's the distinction between the two?
Yeah. A spirit is an energy that you bring in the below realm, and soul is in the above realm. And spirit is a finite energy, and soul is an infinite energy. And so the process of alchemy, and it's in our talisman, the symbols, the 7 operations that you see in the Ouroboros. That is a process in which you purify each of these essences, if you want to call that. And so the 3 you talked about are actually beautifully would make up a trinity or a triad of wholeness. And so you go through this process of purification through each of these, and then that increases the purity, which will increase, metaphorically, the resonance, if you want to use that term. And by purifying and bringing it to each of those parts of you to its highest form, and then integrating that into a whole, that's where you would increase your highest resonance. And this is like a lifelong process. In alchemy too, they one of the axioms is that that the universe is striving for perfection, and so are we, and that everything has its highest form. And so a lot of people are familiar with lead to gold as kind of what alchemists would do, but lead is what they saw as the lowest metal. So if you think of lead, it's heavy, it's toxic, you don't want to eat it, and doesn't have the best qualities, but inside of it is what you need to make gold. So it's like if you're familiar with the tarot, the fool, he's carrying that backpack with the sack. He doesn't know it, but everything he needs to become the magician or the alchemist is actually inside of him. So he already has it. And then the highest metal is gold. And so gold has these incredible properties. It's we need it. Like, we wouldn't be doing this conversation without gold. It's an essential, because of its ability to move energy. It's an essential element to all of our computing, as example. So gold was the highest and lead was the lowest. So when you look at the symbols in our talisman, the first symbol is actually the symbol for lead. Also the symbol, there's always a correspondence in alchemy. So that's also the symbol for Saturn, which is, there was the slowest planet out there. So these are more archetypal energies that these represent. And then the process, of course, takes you to, the highest. So it's a continual process of evolving and moving to a more nobler metal, if you want to call it that.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of layers in alchemy, so we'll wade into the pool. We won't go.
I love that within, 10 minutes, we're going right into the depth of the esoterics that is alchemy. I love it. So zoom out a little bit, because you are a serial entrepreneur. You're a very practical guy, right? And then you're also a serious student of alchemy. On the surface itself, it seems counterintuitive, because you're a very practical person, but yet you're also very interested in the esoteric science or the esoteric studies of alchemy. So tell us a little bit about the origin story. How did you arrive here?
Yeah. Well, it's true. I'm very very, very logical. But when I was young, I was always dreaming, I guess. And I was a lucid dreamer. So lucid is when you are dreaming, but you're awake. So I would almost blend, what was kind of my dream world with my real world. They where that boundary was not so clear for me. But in my normal world,
was that cultivated? Was it a talent that you just had?
It just was there. It was, and I think we're born with a lot of capabilities that that maybe we drift away from, from being quite young. I think it's part of our journeys to rediscover, these deeper capabilities. And then I was also having synchronicities all the time. And to me, synchronicities was just this is just an artifact of the universe. I thought it was normal, and it wasn't until I got older that I realized that no, these aren't normal. You do not speak about these. And around that time, my synchronicity started to go down. So my sort of observing of that as not being natural, and maybe the other part was the order that came into my life from, not being a child anymore, and needing to go to school and pay attention, do what you're told. This took me away from that state of being. And then I've always wanted to go back there. It's like as I got older, and I came across, as I mentioned earlier, Jung's synchronicity, and I didn't even, I hadn't even heard of that term. It's like, wow, this is a thing. There's actual thing. Of course, it's a bit of an esoteric, part of study. He did bring it into the scientific realm, and that led me on that journey. Then I got deep into Jung. I read everything Jung. I even traveled to, he has his home Bullington on Lake Zurich. I got deep into his work, and with that, he had this series of books on alchemy, and I had not called The Psychology of Alchemy. They're quite thick, and I did not go into that work. Part of it was the thickness of the books, but it just seemed too esoteric for me. And one day, I picked up the series of books. I'm part of the Jungian Institute here, and I ended up buying the books at their library fair. And but I never opened them up. I just put them in my library. And then one day I picked them up and started to go through it. And I started to really connect with the symbols. And it reminded me of this dream. I had this very unique dream many years earlier. And in this dream, I was like staring in this deep blue, and I was in a really beautiful state. And there's these fibers kind of floating everywhere. And then wherever I would stare, these fibers would come together and form these symbols.
Did you say fire burst?
Fibers would come.
Fibers.
Yeah, they're like almost like a white. It's really like they seem like something. Yeah, I mean, perhaps a computer could generate something like it, but it was fractal like in parts of it as well. And they would form these symbols, and then I would just like look away and just go into a gaze, and then I'd look somewhere else and they would form a new symbol. And I connected what I saw in the imagery in the book to this dream. So that was my synchronicity, if you want to call it, to get deep into alchemy. And so that's what led me on that journey. But I did resist it for a while. And I can't say I mean there's I can't say that it has any clear teachings. It's more of a framework. It's more of like there's certain deep principles, like we were talking about correspondence, this idea of the correspondence between Saturn, the planet Saturn and lead as an example, the correspondence between the below realm and the above realm. Another correspondence of Saturn with the mind is ego, where gold, which is the same symbol for sun, is the correspondence or the relationship is that of enlightenment. Or if you actually go into quantum mechanics, correspondence, the best example would probably be Niels Bohr's concept of complementarity, wave particle duality. This is a correspondence where the wave and the particle, they correspond to each other. At the same time, they're opposite, and together they are one. So it seems to be a deep design foundation. It's a deep axiom of how the universe works. And it's very interesting that alchemy sort of understood this so long ago, and now that we understand quantum mechanics, we can sort of see there's a deep congruence with how we are, how quantum mechanics works to the axioms of alchemy. And like, you probably have heard, like, there's this writing called the Emerald Chapter. You probably would have heard this first idea.
No, what's that?
You would have heard this: as above, so below,
Yep.
as above. That's essentially that principle of correspondence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me actually drill on this a little bit. I think this is interesting because some people, I actually, you don't know this, but I myself, I'm a lucid dreamer too.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I thought it was normal that you could control your dreams, and I didn't know that until decades later. That's a unique thing that lots of people strive to do. That I was gifted with that, ability.
Quick question, just to qualify: are you still lucid dreaming? Has it increased or decreased? Give me a sense of what's happening to it.
I would say so when I was younger, it was definitively deterministic.
Okay.
I could,
on demand,
I could do whatever it is I want to do. And I was,
you lost those powers though.
I have, yes. And so these days is not as obvious. Sometimes I could do it, but not as much.
Right.
And yeah, I'm aware that people are actively studying how to do this consciously. So, but I'm also not so in tune with why you want to do that consciously. And if you cultivated the skill, what's possible. So maybe you can help me answer those questions. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I was just curious. It's a general pattern that I've seen though, is this with other capabilities, we lose them. And so, you can regain them. And what are the mechanisms? Is it that coherence, getting to its, so I think we are born in that more pure state. And it seems to be that there's a connection to these elements. Now, there are still hacks to get there, but they're not necessarily the best thing to do, perhaps in getting there. In the same way, some people will use psychedelics to get to the state that meditators do a lot of work. Sometimes you need to do the work in order to especially if you want to sustain these states as more default mode, right? Rather than just getting windows or glimpses back into these places.
Well, let me ask you this. So for someone like me or someone who aspire to be a lucid dreamer, why, how is that, practically speaking, valuable in one's life, other than, it's a more entertaining experience at night, right? Other than that, why even exert the effort to, cultivate, practice the skills of lucid dreaming?
Yeah, well, it's an incredible realm to do the work, you can go into your subconscious, like your kind of in a way that Burning Man allows you to dance with your subconscious in a way that's better than the normal world. In your dreams is the characters that will emerge that you can actually interact with, not just observe, but interact with. That is that is the beauty of lucid dreaming, is to do that work.
Can you say more about that? Actually, I'm not very clear. What do you mean by that?
Sorry, which parts?
The work. What's the work?
Oh, yeah, like the alchemical work of, and if you want to, part of it, of what is unconscious, making it conscious, if you're familiar with Jung's shadow work. And so, the alchemical work of finding that true self, what you describe, those 3 dimensions you described earlier for yourself, like what is your intention, like what, and your intention can evolve, depending on, that, some people know what their intention for their lifetime is going to be, and others it's a constant becoming. And so you're able to absolutely, do that work. You can certainly go and play, just as some people maybe go to play at Burning Man, but meanwhile, even when you're playing, the work emerges often while you're doing that. There's an author, I remember his name, Gateway to the Self, and basically he makes the he writes about. I actually ran into him at another science conference many years ago as well. But yeah, I believe it's called Lucid Dreaming, Gateway to the Self, and he writes about this work.
Okay.
In that
well,
book.
let's the quote that I was trying to quote is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate.
Yeah.
And I think the work that you're referring to is, how do you make the unconscious more conscious during the dreaming state? Is that correct?
Yeah. And part of that is like the light that you use to shine on the shadow. And we can actually bring this back to Burning Man. This is one of the things I love about Burning Man, is that light through peak experience. When you show up, you can actually light up parts of, like your bliss, or what Joseph Campbell calls your bliss, those things that make you alive, that creates light. And at that time, it can shine on some of your shadow. And this is what I think leads to so much growth at Burning Man, because these peak experiences, they trigger that awareness of growth, and we're able to see parts of ourselves we didn't see before, and then we can do that work. And this is why, like, when Burning Man is so synonymous with personal growth and transformation.
Yeah, I was listening to the Burning Man podcast yesterday, just so that I can get familiar with what exactly are their philosophies, clearly articulated. And part of one guest said, the reason why Burning Man is so quote unquote transformative, it isn't because they are intentional to create a container of transformation per se. They do have some rules and boundaries, but ultimately it's a place where all of the subtle intentions are taken away. It's not about accumulation of money or status or power. So if so, then your subconscious is then freed up to say, okay, I don't have to do any of those things. Now what? So every little decisions that you choose in Burning Man is more from the space of, okay, I'm free to do whatever I want. What do I want to do? Do I want to go to Playalchemist to listen to a talk, or the Orgy Dome, or get a coffee, or hang out with my friends, go visit some arts, or whatever the thing?
I would say that's part of it, but that's not all of it. And I'll share with you one of the synchronicity experiments I did. What I tried to do was look at, when did I have synchronicities, what were the conditions, and recreate those conditions. So I called it my perfect day, and I ran this experiment, as you do in alchemy, that you have to run them like 3 times is sort of the minimum. And so 3 days I ran this perfect day. And so I did all these wonderful things. I had a bit of a structure, but no timeline. And so I would move from one activity, and when I felt ready to go to the next one, and then go to the next one, and then my day would unfold. So I did this experiment, and part of it was emptying the mind out of this loose architecture. And after 3 days, nothing. I was like, not even one possible synchronicity. And so I was like, obviously,
this is at Burning Man.
No, this was not a Burning Man. This was outside, and so I was just looking in the kind of, what are the things, had some influence from Burning Man, but I was trying to recreate those conditions. Then the next day, I liked those. I liked the things I was doing. I just ended up doing roughly the same thing, and the synchronicities were off the chart. So yes, part of it is we impose too much order and structure that take up our mind. That is absolutely part of it. But much more important is the subtleness of how we show up, you know, how we be in the world, what we look for. You know, if you think of the observer effect, we can't look directly for things. And so there's a real subtle art. And in the first days of this experiment, even subconsciously, I think I was looking for these outcomes, you know, I was just like, okay. And in the same way, you know, you know, the way the observer effect affects quantum experiments, right? It disrupts that wave that comes. And so that next day I just forgot about it all. And then it started to happen. So there's this cultivating of this subtle way of being that's really, really, it's really fragile too. You know, it doesn't take much to, you know, to kind of hijack your mind, you know? And so this is, and this state, you can get shocked into this state at Burning Man. Part of it is, it's a series of conditions, like the difficulties, right? You know, like the storm, you're like, you have a plan and that plan just gets blown up. And so there's a lot of things that will help you get to this state of surrender. And the other part, of course, is certainly, you know, just your heart opening up. Your heart is a great way to calm your mind and get you out of your mind. So that heart-mind coherence, and that happens with all the love at Burning Man. So there's, you know, yes, there's a lot more of these conditions that you know, lead to synchronicities at Burning Man. And, you know, one of the things in our society is the you know, the order, you know, that we impose. You know, we're not supposed to live in this much order and this much structure. You know, even for me, the scheduling of this was quite difficult. I would have, and I think we discussed the possibility of this being more emergent. And we put too much order in our society, and we're not able to follow the natural flows or the natural wave of things in, you know, and as you know, if you're a surfer, if you miss the wave, you miss the wave. So it's, yeah, so this is one of the things that I'm kind of going back to your previous question, still sort of answering your current question, but yeah, that's something that I would say that is also really important, is how you show up. And then connected to that at a real fundamental level is development, our human development. It's that led to goal. You know, ego does not play well in synchronicity. You can create things in what alchemy calls the lower realm, and that's where like black magic sits, but ego and synchronicity do not go well together. And those especially, go ahead.
Before we go into that, I think that's a juicy topic in itself. I wanted to double click on this tension between surrender, full surrender to the waves, right, of the ocean, versus intention, because I think that's something juicy here. If I'm so attached to my intention, I'm grasping for things, then from my experience, right, that's where suffering comes, because I'm attached to the outcome. But at the same time, if I don't have any intention at all, I'm just kind of going with the flow of the ocean of the universe, then also I'm just going to go with flow, right? So I think there's a subtlety there that you're discussing, because you mentioned other things like the difficult environment forces you to surrender. So
that's a great question. Let's go back to you. So you described this triad of you know, parts of you, and intention being one of them, correct?
Yes, being clear about what is it that you desire, or what I desire, correct?
Yeah, and so you can look at this like at the higher levels, those three, and it can be more, are like the bearings of your compass.
Mhm.
And if your compass is like not calibrated, or you don't know where north is, the compass is sort of, not going to help guide you in the right
Correct.
way.
Mhm.
It's also not a foundation, of resonance when you're unsure about those. Now, it's okay when you're younger to have goals, and that would be associated with work in the material realm. And so if your intention has a goal associated with it, it's it can be okay when you're young, but this is because you're learning. When you get when you transcend that and you're starting to do the and I'm using alchemical terms, of there's like the lower work, which is mastering of the material realm, and then there's a higher work, which is the mastering of the above realm. And in the above realm is the realm of infinite energy, and the below realm is finite energy. And when you get to the above realm, if you're doing the work there, goals are problematic, and milestones and targets, KPIs, whatever. You can look at things. They're always helpful, but I very explicitly in our business, people will create aims, but it's more like a scaffolding. So it's okay to have, hey, this is where I think we're going, but it can change, and it's not what matters. What matters is those bearings that we spoke about. It's like, your intention should come from who you are. Like this is what's your personal myth? What matters to you? What's inside of you that wants to come out? And that could be a process. So the goals that you set along the way, that will help you learn about yourself. And then when you know that self, then you will let go of all goals, because goals will get in the way. And it's a subtle art, right? It's not very clear. And it's because too, like, we don't know, right? Like, to have a goal means that, I know this is, how can we know, right? How can we know the really important things? And so we have to, and this is what creates synchronicity. It's like being clear on that compass and allowing for emergence. So if I were to rewind, my life, like 5-ish years, I have a Burning Man camp. I never, that was an emergent thing. I was leaving Burning Man. I guess it is a little more than 5 years where the idea came, but the camp is 5 years old now. And I have a new baby, and this is a child. I didn't, that's emergent. Also, Chrysalis, that this entity that this is what you called, I guess, a holding company. We don't know exactly what to call it yet, but we were calling ourselves a meta company because we help support these other companies. But the term meta is maybe not, since Facebook branded themselves Meta, is not maybe the best. But I didn't know that was going to exist. And then we created some of these new companies, and I didn't know that was going to exist. These were not planned. These were just emergent. And what I love about that too, if I were to look 5 years into the future, of course I don't know what's going to happen. And to, it's yeah.
So I want, okay, so to your point, 100% aligned with you. It's, to me, the metaphor I give my listener a lot is, have an intention, but hold it loosely, like how you hold a fish. If you hold a fish too tight, it goes away. If you don't hold it at all, it goes away, right? So hold it loosely. But I want to double click on what what you said earlier about your perfect day experiment.
Yeah.
Because you said that you had an intention, however subtle it might be, and it didn't create any kind of synchronicity at all. But the day after, you threw the intention away, so to speak, And then yet the synchronicities were off the chart. So double clicking on this point exactly is, do you set an intention and then throw it away, or you revisit, look at loosely how Playalchemist is going to come about, once in a while, every 90 minutes or every day or whatever, every quarter, every week, so the tactical moments is what I'm curious about. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So did you ask a question specifically about Playalchemist there, or you're just using that as an example?
I'm using that as an example.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, when you're young, it's okay to, be really clear, because that's part of that, your learning journey. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's a subtle art. It's kind of like thinking of order and chaos. What's that place? Like, I don't know, for anyone that's done extreme sports, like one of the sports I do now is mountain biking. I live here in Vancouver, so climbing up, and like, where's the center between, leaning in and, to describe that, almost impossible, because it's
Mm-hmm.
surrender in the state, and you have to have confidence, but you can't be overconfident. You can't
Mm-hmm.
overestimate yourself. You can't underestimate yourself, because
Mm-hmm.
both of these will lead to a crash.
Yep.
Both, just like in life, you can underestimate, we see ego often can overestimate or underestimate self, depending on what side of the duality they're in. But it's really the unification of those forces, and that's the correspondence or the complementarity that has to come into play. And that's where that subtle art of essentially integration
Mm-hmm.
allows you to find that center. And like I said, when at some point you will surrender intention just to more of like a bearing of a compass, where the intention is not going to have any destination or any outcome. Like, it won't look like anything that has a destination. It's more of something that's infinite, always going to be. It will manifest its way in different ways, but it's it will never be achieved, because it's more fundamental to your being, because you're getting deeper into your being. And that's sort of, when you get deeper, you leave the material realm or the finite realm and get to like more fundamental, what's more infinite after that.
Before we go into camp, because I do want to get into specifically Playalchemist, the camp. How would you articulate? I call it the horizon, because you never arrive to the horizon, but it's the direction that you head towards, right?
Yeah.
How would you articulate that direction, that North Star, that horizon for CK, for Christopher?
Well, I read Plato when I was 18, and a quote from Socrates I always loved is, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And I never had like a mission, and but after doing things for a while, I was able to reflect and go, like, what's the pattern that is me? And so I basically quit school in grade 5, and I hated, I had an experience, which is another story, that triggered this quit. So I quit in my mind, and I would daydream, and then when I was 18, I got a job where my dad worked, which was a factory.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited. Okay, I'm in the real world, I'm going to make money, and I'm finished with this waste of time that they called school. And I very quickly realized that this is just like school. You
Mm-hmm.
behave, it's a socialized minds, do what you're told, stay in your box, and everything's going to be okay. And this is not humane. This is not for people. So this is the
Mm-hmm.
reason I started a business, was purely emergent. I wanted to create a better environment. I didn't think that, this was for humans. We're not supposed to be this way. So I started my first business, which still exists, when I was 18, and I was just looking, to create a place for me to survive, and first and foremost, but to create a more humane place. And then years ago, I picked up, you know, a lot of people are familiar with Simon Sinek, you know, his
Start with why.
Start with Why book, and he's a pretty good orator and storyteller. I really like his you know, the frames in which he views things from, and he has this workbook that kind of, you know, find your purpose, right? So I went through that, and in my reflection, I came to realize that I like to create conditions or community where people transform. And then, so I just looked at the different things, including creating the camp at Burning Man, you know, which was, you know, and me taking people to Burning Man and seeing their transformations and seeing how it helped me. I want to create a more intentional container around transformation. And, but going back to my experience in grade 5, it was a somewhat of a traumatic experience, but I had also sort of stepped into my own being, and I took agency, or I sort of claimed my sovereignty and my identity, and that was a transformation. And I also like looked at what happened to me as like, well, we all are on this journey, and we all have to claim our sovereignty. And so I've been much of what I do, whether it be in writing or which is newer to me, but certainly in the business entities. And we in our organization, we use self-organizing or self-managing principles. So we have a operating system that supports emergence, you know, rather than a traditional power hierarchy that tries to, you know, control and predict, use incentives to, you know, control behaviors. It's really would say the opposite of that, but it's the next level of that. So if there's like a lower levels competition, at higher levels cooperation. And it doesn't mean that there's no competition in there, but it's for the higher purpose of cooperation for the betterment of everybody.
I love it. So if I'm hearing you say your North Star, the direction, the horizon, I'm mixing analogies, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Is to create containers where people transform. In a nutshell, ultimately, everything that you do that guides you, the writing, the video series, the companies that you form, the Burning Man camps that you run, that's guiding you. That's the North Star.
And when you transform to these, you know, if you want to call it, you know, like in that journey of alchemy, getting closer to your gold or your inner gold, as an example, synchronicities, well, increase. And, you know, just as your synchronicities increase, guess what happens? You become more spiritual because you get introduced to something that has meaning, you know, and especially when, you know, they bring, you know, light into your life. And so, you know, I feel like this is potentially one reason why we're here, is to, you know, go through this evolution.
Yep.
And what alchemy was for is that they believe that, you know, there is this natural cycle, and by understanding the operations and the practices and the principles, they could accelerate that. So how do we accelerate the process to that highest being or that highest self? And that's the whole purpose of it. You can't skip steps, you know, you can't go do the work. The work has to happen, but can it happen a lot faster? Yes, it can. Not everything, but often people will get stuck. So like the first operation is a fire operation, something happens to you, a calcination, and then you need to dissolve it away, you know, before, you know, you need to, you know, get rid of that calcination. And, you know, often people can get stuck there, you know, be dissolving. They could have finished their dissolving, but they don't take the next step. And the next step after you dissolve things away is to separate. And at this step, decide, and this requires, confidence and, but what do I want to keep and what do I want to throw away? And maybe you want to even bring something new. So you bring a set of new ingredients together to what's called conjunction. Actually, getting to that separation phase, if you want to look at it from a global perspective, we're almost much of what we see in the world today is about separation. And even in our psyches, in ourselves, in society, we're seeing the polarities play out, the culture wars. Globally, we're moving to a more multipolar world. And so we go to the conjunction, we bring these new ingredients together. But again, a lot of people think that when you bring these ingredients together, it's like, and I'll use the example of goals. I want to get this new car. I want to get, all these things. That's a conjunction. Bring those things together and you think, I'm going to be happy now, or whatever the story that they told themselves was about that. But when you actually bring ingredients together, there's another death and rebirth. So if you think of wine, you bring grapes and yeast and all these ingredients together in the process of making wine, you don't yet have wine. Those ingredients then need to ferment. And in that process, there's another death and another rebirth. And so this is where the spirit can be, the essence of that, the grapes can come out. So by understanding the process, you can accelerate your own human, evolution. And this is what, so alchemists would study the material realm. So what worked with metals can also work for the human spirit. And that's that correspondence. So in the material realm, there were insights in just working with, with matter. And that's where the principles and the laws were derived from.
Would you say the purpose, adding what you're saying to Playalchemist together, would you say that the purpose of Playalchemist is such that you introduce these mechanics of alchemy to the burners that stay with the camp or visit the camp?
Yeah, well, I was leaving Burning Man in 2015, and after coming year after year, inviting a few more people, and seeing, I think that year in particular saw a lot of transformations in people. And so I was leaving, and this is where the idea, it just came to me all at once. And I didn't know why. It was like, do this camp and, theme it, tie it to alchemy and build a pyramid. And it had to be the dimensions of Giza. And I'm not into pyramids. I've never been to Egypt before, but the pyramid symbol is a symbol for fire. And the pyramid itself represents, is an alchemical symbol. 5 represents the 4 elements with the 5th. But I didn't actually know why. I was just like, you have to do this. And I drew out the camp right away. Like it was pretty, it was like more of like a download, which doesn't happen to me often. And in alchemy, when you have things that come to you from the above realm, so when something comes from the outside, truly like a message, there's actually it's a law. You must follow those. So this was sort of, when I got this, it wasn't like, should I do this? It was like, no, oh shit, I have to do this.
Okay, so double clicking on that real quick. That's an important distinction. When something comes from above, you must follow it quickly.
Yeah.
Say more about that, because at Burning Man or other places, meditation retreat, ayahuasca ceremonies, whatever the case may be, people receive things and some of them just follow it quickly, whatever the thing says. And some of them take some time to discern, to think about, to really, meditate and let it contemplate, what is the message within. So different schools of thought there. say more about what you just said.
Wow, yeah, no, great question again. So this is the Alchemist, which has done the work, and the work allows you to discern between where something comes from. So if you think about it, our minds are constantly processing, and we'll have a lot of intuitions that will come to us that'll be from the mind. Some of it's really useful, some of it's not. And so knowing, knowing it's like a scenario, like, you could be going through an issue and your mind could present a scenario to you. The ability to discern that it's coming from your mind is a skill that requires, the work to be done. And in fact, a lot of people will function only from the plane of mind. So they actually are not accessing, the higher messages. Now, when you have access to, if you're more in resonance with the ability to get these, if you're having synchronicities as an example, and you're having these, you will start to get messages from the outside, but often they're blended with your mind. And so at times, like if you think of a spectrum, here's like the mind, and here's the outer world, and here's the inner world of the mind, and the outer world of the collective unconscious, or whatever you want to call it. Sometimes in the center. These ones are difficult to unfold, but because you have to then go and like, okay, well, what's from the outside? What noise did I put into this? And is that noise useful or not? So you have to do the work. But there are times when something is clearly from the outside. It's not from your shadow. It's not, from your, it's clearly some sort of guide from the outside. And so I am not a master in this myself. I know when it's from the mind. I know when it's from here, when it's really pure mind, or I get uncertain when it's blended, and I'm still developing, this skill, but I can certainly discern, those two. And yeah, we could go more into that, but that's a high level response to your question.
I appreciate it. One of the practice that I learn, it may be really simple, but it helps me discerning ideas from the mind versus idea from the spirit.
Yeah.
That is simply just put your hand on your heart and then feel like, what does the heart desire? Because the heart is essentially, to me, is the spokesperson of the spirit. So then I can discern what is the busyness of the mind, the content that the mind produces, versus what is coming from the depth of my spirit, my soul.
Yeah. When it comes to the outside, it's really like you don't know where it comes from. Like it's just like all of a sudden, it's like it's truly like and it appears, and it's very wise. Like there's like I got this when, like, about the camp. Like it was there all at once. I had to use my mind to like put the pieces together. But yeah, and so there's for me, there's certain characteristics of each that I've come to understand.
So you receive this message, tied to alchemy, build it at the dimension of the Giza.
Yeah.
And then what? Yeah.
So then I went home and I drew up a 1-page concept while it was fresh. I put everything on one page, and almost like a vision board, you could say. It's like, okay. And I'm, I'm still, ask me like, why am I needing to do this? I'm still trying to understand the answers. Cause like, where do you get a pyramid from? Right? Like you go to Amazon.com, like, so and then I went to Burning Man in 2016. I said, okay, I have to decide, when. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so I went to Burning Man in 2016, and with the looking for the answer, and the answer came. And so I decided to to bring the camp to life in 2017, which was our first year. That's also when I met, I think you've met Anna, my partner. I met her in 2016 as well. We had a series of synchronicities. I first met her, I saw her at a camp, and then she came and introduced herself and says, "Oh, hi, I'm Anna from Ukraine." And but there was a deep soul connection. And then 5 more times I ran into her in random places in like 24 hours. And so the very, very last time I got her email address.
I love that.
Yeah.
And the rest is history. Now you have
now we have a
child.
Little, exactly.
Yeah. Well, okay. So as someone who lived the philosophy or practiced the philosophy of alchemy, who loves to think about synchronicities, any indicators, for the playa romance, people who experience playa romance?
Well, I mean, the synchronicities are, there's something there, and in my case, it took 5 times before I got the courage to ask her for even some contact info. But it was the universe that was bringing us together, and we even met like in obscure camps in the back. I would end up drawn there for some reason, and then she would appear, and she's like, "Wow, what's it wasn't like it was the same place. It was random places all over the playa." And then I also I was working on the Milton Secret project, which is based on a book by Eckhart Tolle, who lives here in Vancouver as well. And I'd messaged her and said, "Hey, do you know this author?" And she sends me a picture of her at that moment. She was traveling, and one of the only books she came was my favorite book of his, and she was reading his book at the time. So the synchronicities, didn't even stop there, but that's a sign. But it's you have to be, again, careful. There's this you can look for signs, based on your desire. So that subtleness of seeing, it's cultivating that way of being is really what's important. I have come across many individuals who, they'll describe to me, what they think is a synchronicity. And when I kind of feel into it and question it, it's more of a patternicity where they're wanting something, and that can be okay for the time, but it's not in just trying to get meaning out of things. So again, it's we have to be very, very careful that we're not trying to create something. Like, you truly want it. How you really, really know is when the chances of it are really well outside the realms of randomness, like well outside the realms of randomness. And randomness is like a classical law in Newtonian mechanics. Like, if you flip a coin 100 times, it's going to be like 49, 51. Like there's like a realm of a percentage of error, but it's very it's very predictable. Whereas in quantum mechanics, randomness will take on a whole different set of principles. But so it has to be well outside of that. So that's one way. But also, you would want to ask yourself, am I wanting this, right? So that subtle way of being is a really important thing to cultivate.
Thank you for that. So let's come back to camp. So 2016, you decided, you chose, yes, I'm gonna do this next year. Most people would say, let me start off small, and instead of whatever the dimension is, let's do MVP, minimum viable product, to test what's like. But no, not Christopher. You just went boom, full scale right away. Was there any, doubt or hesitation rather, or any kind of, like, tell us a journey going from I'm gonna do this to boom, manifestation, reality. I don't know the dimensions of the pyramid, but full scale.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, it was no, it was full of difficulties, and but there was never any like, oh, make it smaller. I did run into a different camp founder lead, was doing a camp for a long time. I ran into this gentleman in the beginning of 2017, and I told him about the camp, and he's like, you have to sit me down like a father son, and he's been doing that for a long time, and his advice, I think, is normally like, I don't disagree with his advice, but he says, like, you need to really listen to my advice. You cannot go from here to here. It takes a lot of time, and like I say, I don't disagree with that advice being good advice. But again,
how big is camp today, by the way? 250?
Just under 300. It was 286.
286. Yeah, got it. All right.
Yeah, and so, but again, the message was like, it was a certain scale, just this, just what we needed to do, and it couldn't have been a small camp. But there were so many things that just like magically worked that probably shouldn't have. And
like what?
Well, so Anne and we're driving to arrive on Playa to build, and it's like Monday, and we get a call that so we had designed that, all the parts got manufactured. We weren't even sure if it was going to go together, but the parts, and they weren't even all done. Like the panels we were still building at the first year on site, so we had the parts for the panels. And so we're driving in, and we get a call that the shipment got pulled into secondary inspection in LA, where it arrived, and that generally takes about 2 weeks. So there were all these challenges that and that fortunately we have this the girl that is kind of the core operator of the camp, Crystal. She somehow figured out how to get that out of there really fast. She's pretty magic with things, but it's very we ended up getting the shipment on Wednesday, and
wow.
But like that should, like we, at that point, I didn't even know if like we were going to have any pyramid. Our camp would have just been completely empty. We would have been there with nothing. So but there was just a series of events like that.
And by the way, quick double clicking. How many people that first year?
It was over 100, but I don't recall the actual number, like maybe 140 perhaps.
140.
Yeah. But it was only like 10. We didn't have that many early passes, but we only like kind of settled on around 10 people that were builders, So
oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was the hardest I've ever worked in my life to build that, but it was but there's all of these lessons along the way when you're pushing those edges.
Number one, I can only imagine when you get that call that Monday telling you that the shipment has been set aside, contained, and my reaction would have just kaboom.
Yeah.
I love that you just grab your balls and you kept going. Anyway, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's part of that subtleness, right? Of you just have to accept, like, and if and you can't be too negative about it. You can't be positive. It's just like, again, there's that subtleness of how you see it, and if it's meant to be, it's meant to be.
So double clicking on this, I need to stop saying double clicking, but I will because it serves a purpose. So I was speaking to a couple of, so far, 1, 2, 3. You're the fourth or fifth camp organizers I've spoken to. and they've described to me the arduous task of pulling volunteering people together in a very short time frame and in a way that's about transformation, right? So what they've told me is that when push comes to shove, human beings, leaders tend to resort to force, and they don't typically behave nicely, right? They just want to get the outcome. So they'll say just, they will squeeze the builders to make sure that they deliver on time, right? Even though the intention is to create a container of transformation, about love and positive vibes and everything. So how do you ensure when it matters, right? That Monday, that Tuesday, that Wednesday, when it's the tension is high, you still maintain that good energy and that positive vibe such that the artifacts that you built has that resonance.
Yeah, well, force is associated with, like lead, and you don't, yeah. So how, maybe I can articulate this with a story. So in the camp and even the first year, there's different people that, and you have to give some space for emergence, but we find people that through a process that kind of show up and take on different roles. So as an example, our build lead, wasn't leading the pyramid, but he's leading the rest of the camp. Ian, he came up through, I talked to my first friend who I went to Burning Man with originally. I told him about I'm going to do this camp, and he said, you know what, this couple just visited us. They're going across Canada, and his dream is to build a large Burning Man camp. So
wow,
again, synchronicities along the way. And then we had another build lead who ran the pyramid lead. And so I'll just share with you a story about kind of setting the container. So he was responsible for building the pyramid. So it's really clear you get into, that right understanding that, and that person, they're not told that, they want that, right? So that's the art form of, taking that for people to really energetically own something. So the pyramid build was, it was insane. We had not enough people, and we had some of our team, the last of our team came Thursday. We had started to build on, like Tuesday, it arrived Tuesday late at night, I guess, or even Wednesday. And so we started to build in this group that they had this group. We had our last couple workers, and they had worked on a lot of sets for music festivals, and they built a lot of things, and they were just following how fast this got made. And they did some calculations. They said, we need 30 guys and 3 weeks to build it, was their math. And so they were recommending we cap it at a couple levels, so no pyramid, and just, that was going to be our year. And so the build lead for the pyramid, Eric, he comes to me and says, okay, he's looking for my decision, actually. And said, like, what should we do, and and he was very but see, as a steward, I can't make these decisions. They're not mine to make at all. In fact, I make a decision, I rob people of their agency or their sovereignty, in doing that, and it affects their ability to really, own something and hold something. So I just, but I can help. And so I just said, well, it was like Wednesday, I think it was Thursday. I said, well, we don't have to make that decision today. So we went on. And then there was one builder, and, you wait to see like where the leadership is going to emerge, because you need someone to hold that energy. And it has to be like, again, we're talking about pure energy, right? Force is not pure energy. Like it's lower energy. and it has to come from the inside. The people doing the work has to be part of the whole group. And so I had one guy, Sky was his name, a dear friend. I remember like he came, he's like, we gotta complete this thing. Like we have to finish it. So we found the person that, and so he, without being the one in charge or driving it, he was like the emergent sort of energy that catalyzed the group to really drive to get it completed, which we shouldn't have been able to complete it. It was like, really, it was an insane amount of work. And we didn't even actually have all the parts for all the panels. We couldn't actually do the paneling. We didn't even get all those parts in, but we did finish the structure and we did put panels on the lower part. But it was that process of letting the whole team really get a coherence around and a commitment that is somewhat organic and held from within. And so that's how we also run in our organizations. And this is kind of the how self-management works. You need people to really, it functions from intrinsic motivation rather than extrinsic. So extrinsic uses like incentives and all kinds of ways to, get your behavior. Your expectations is a forceful thing, what I expect. And, that's a way of function that really needs to die. And we need better ways of working together and cooperating that comes from a place of, wholeness and interdependency and interconnection.
I know that I keep wanting to have you finish the story of the camp's evolution, but I can't help it. There's something that I want to double click on again. So I used to be the chief culture officer of a company of 250 people, and our intention was similar to you, that we wanted to create a container, a place, an environment where people can self-actualize.
Yeah.
And so I would focus on the intrinsic motivators, right? Their purpose and how this is a platform to help them make progress, be better, right? Emergent, a way of being towards their purpose. And the company would offer that environment. However, one big lesson that I learned from going through that experience was that, and this is actually counter to what you just said, is that the comp structure didn't support the intrinsic motivators. So they were pull because they want to make better for their family, make better paycheck, make a better promotion. So they would pull into the traditional way of, let me just do a job versus doing things that's for my purpose, right? So that's one big lesson that I learned. So I'd love to not debate, but I want to understand the nuances of what you're saying here. Is how do you align, if not the incentive structure, the comp structures, then how do you organize a company such that people are pulled to bring their whole self, focus on the intrinsic motivator, and own their leadership and step up to lead? Does that make sense, what I'm trying to articulate? Or
Yeah. I mean, what you're describing is like there's a expressed way, a desire to function a certain way, but there's an inconsistency in how, an incongruence in how the incentives work. And for this to work, it's you would want consistent. In the same way, when someone says something, their words should also be aligned and coherent with one's actions, right? When someone, and we have too much discoherence in society. Like it's unfortunate that for so many, it's unfortunate that words don't matter as much. And in alchemy too, like alchemists were very secretive in some ways, but they were very careful with what they said. Their words mattered, and it's a law to have congruence with your actions. Now, in your example of, the external incentives, that, yeah, this would disrupt because you've got inconsistencies. And so in our business, we have employee ownership, and we don't have, like bonuses and incentives that drive performance. These are used to basically get certain behaviors, that's external, right? Somebody has a way that they want you to behave, and they want to incent those conditions. And so that is counter to intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation, though, is a journey. That's part of that alchemical journey, that journey of discovering, like, what is it, that I want to express in the world? What are my gifts? And that is a process. And so it's not there's no formula there, but it's more. And so like our approach is, we have scaffolding that gives people, actionable next steps to meet them where they're at, because everybody's at a different, state in their journey, and a different, state in their evolution. Obviously, I have a toddler now. A toddler is different than an adolescent, right? I'm not going to impose the same. An adolescent should be different than, an adult. And so we support that journey. And there's if I were to maybe just give one example, that's something I've observed. One of the things I love watching patterns, and I started hiring people 31 years ago. I hired my first 2 employees 31 years ago. I was 18, and they asked me, I remember, like, okay, what are we supposed to do? And I said, well, I don't know, I'm just a kid, you guys figure it out. And I've hired, I don't know the number, but over 1,000 people in my time, and I've been able to see these patterns, long and short, play out. But the one common pattern is that people and there's a lot of people that sit in what Robert Keegan calls a socialized mind. Mm-hmm. Where we are conditioned by our outer world, and so much of our conditioning is, led by an authority, your teacher, your boss. They tell you what to do, and you mostly do it, right? Meanwhile, as kids, we're kind of free generally. And one thing I've noticed, that people, they desire to be autonomous, but when given the opportunity, they will resist it. So again, there's a cultural transformation necessary that, has them cross that chasm to actually claim, to take their sovereignty, to actually do that. And so in our practices, we have practices that help kind of people along that journey, to allow them to take the smaller steps before they take the bigger steps, or if they want to take the big step, they can do it. But, in the same way that, well, yeah, the example that came to my mind, maybe it's not the best example, but, dogs that are kind of beaten, they can be in a cage. They won't leave the cage even if the door is open, right? And we've seen other psychological experiments, like this. And but yeah, there's a cultural transformation that because what happens, and it's our principle, agency and ownership, there's a duplicity there. The agency's ability to make a choice, ownership is to own it. Because by making that choice, you also have to take the responsibility of it. And that's something that is sort of, we sort of separate that in our society. It's like, you do the work, you take the responsibility, and gets out of the kind of like the wholeness of things. And so you can't just create a system and everybody's going to behave. No, it's an evolutionary system where people will evolve, and they have to go through these cultural transformations along the way. We could do a whole podcast on this question.
Yeah, I want to come back to that.
There's a whole system on it.
I definitely want to come back to that. Please remind me, because I know that you're writing a book about it, Entrepreneur, right? So we'll definitely come back to that. But I want you to finish your telling the story of the camp. So the first year was 140 people, 10 builders. And if you don't mind, just quickly, the second year, third year, fourth year, the number of people and then we can go into what lessons you got after 5 years of doing this.
Yeah. So it's we did it 3 years, and by the way, when I first got the message, like the first message was do it 3 years, and so we went, and then this was our 4th year that we just had. It grew a bit
wow.
each year. Like the second year, a bit better, building it a bit further, and it wasn't until 2019 that we actually felt that we completed the original vision. So I go back to that original sheet. So maybe that's why the 3 years are there. It's like, it's going to take you 3 years just to get the essence of it, but it was still pretty chaotic. I mean, but each year, the core grew. Like we did our own alchemy of like, how do we attract like the right people, and and some people go and some people come, and so we try to essentially like the alchemical process purify. And the 3rd year was great. Again, there's a lot of synchronicities along the way. We added the external part of the original design had digital art on the outside, and I remember I was talking to a friend of mine in Bali, and I was this is in 2018. It's like, hey, yeah, I really want to do projection on the, and I don't even know why I even brought it up. I said, I want to do projection on the outside. And he said, oh, you should meet my friend who was standing right beside him, Ryan Uzleski, who does who kind of does all the projection art, and he runs that team and he helps bring the art. And again, that synchronicity, like, there's other people that have the capabilities of doing this, but Ryan, like, he loves this. He wants to create this gift. He wants to pull the artist. Like he was like that was him. That was him. He was the one who wanted to do this. So, again, allowing these synchronicities to happen, it takes time to go through that process. And so, so I think we kind of got the core team together by 2019, which, there's some core people that really make Playalchemist, come together. And it was like its own little alchemical journey. And then, so this is our 4th year, coming out of COVID, and yeah, there was like a sense of wholeness. Like we were not, running all the time. We got the pyramid done earlier, and yeah, and actually Satya, who our daytime programming, he said, this is the first year I'm leaving Burning Man and I'm not exhausted. And yeah, and I felt the same. I was so I think we've entered a new phase. And one way I could look at that in alchemy, you see a lot of pictures in alchemy that are split between this like horizontal and vertical plane, which there's a whole science on that. But in the above plane is the realm of infinite energy. I think the first part we were in the finite energy where we were depleting it, but I think we're tapping into that next level. But yeah, each year we got better, and I think this last year really felt whole. Like it was yeah, everybody really showed up this year, and it was a great year, and I want to continue that. Like this process, we can't do the same thing. We always need to evolve, right? So Playalchemists will always need to, just like alchemy, you're striving for perfection. You'll of course never get to perfection, but you will go on that journey.
You know what? As you're recounting the timeline, I started going to Burning Man in 2017.
Oh, good.
I was there for 18. So Playalchemist has made an impression on me. You're right that 2017, I was questioning, like, are they gonna be able to build the pyramid?
Yeah.
Because by Wednesday, if I recall correctly, that the pyramid wasn't done, if I remember correctly, or Wednesday or Thursday. And I was like,
we finished it. We finished it Wednesday, and we opened Wednesday, and we had B. Swenson and Unders and Seth Swartz play a set.
Yeah.
I remember they launched, and it was really like the party was great. And then I went to bed, or we went to bed. We all went to bed because we were exhausted.
You're exhausted. So quick question. As a camp lead, what I have observed is typically the responsibility weighs so heavily on camp leads that they don't get to enjoy the fruit of their labor. They don't get to enjoy the overall Burning Man so much because they want to make sure that whatever they execute gets done. What year were you able to really enjoy Burning Man and relax?
Well, yeah, when you run a camp, so Burning Man isn't going to be so much for it's a different burn, right? So you're holding, like, this year was the most relaxed I've been, in the sense that I was as lead, when there's something that goes wrong, I have to support and hold space. Plus there's always work to get done. So even when I had time, I'm helping somewhere. So I would play that role. And it was the same for our team. When I look at the other members, they're all pinned to that. And but yeah, so each year it's gotten better, but I still I get little small windows for myself, but it's really more to hold that. But there's like a different joy that comes from that. Like I remember going out, I sleep mostly at night, but of course the camp was loud. I remember going out I heard we had a piano in our lounge area, and I heard the Jan Tiersen, who's a composer. I heard some music from him that now he wasn't playing, but a pianist was playing. It's like, and I love Jan Tiersen, so I'm like, well, that sounds great. And so I went out and just walked around, and I got so much satisfaction from seeing just like the energy that was in the lounge. And then I went to the pyramid again, beautiful energy, people. And this is like the middle of the night, like 3 a.m. Normally things can get a little dark, but it was high vibration. Everybody's like having a lot of fun. Then it went outside and it was the same thing. So like for me, that was like, I felt very good that this container we had attempted to create was, at least at that moment, was really coherent, where we had these different zones, but everybody was having fun. And then I was able to just go, went back to sleep and felt good about it.
So I want you to say more about that a bit more, because ultimately in my mind, you put in so much energy, so much of your life, so much money, right? As a way to curate this beautiful environment, beautiful container. I don't know how many people have gone through the Playalchemist camp, probably in the realm of tens of thousands. I'm assuming, I don't know if you count, but tens of thousands of people. Can you say more about how because your intention is to create a container of transformation.
Yeah.
And then can you say more about what transformations have you witnessed? Whether it's people staying with camp or visitors from outside who you have witnessed or you have heard, anything like that that you can highlight?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of personal sort of stories, and I would, my early years, I would even help facilitate, be a Sherpa for people is one of the ways I described it. And, and what, with the camp, the part of it starts with just the like what we cultivate as a camp, and even the energy that the builders and everybody put into creating the space. We really, our motto is transform yourself, transform the world. So it starts with us. What are we holding as a group, and what intentionality, if you want to use that term, that are we putting into the work that we're doing. And like a magnet, that can help attract, or repel certain energies. And the idea is that at a sort of a macro level, that we create a container that is more purposeful about, creating connection, creating, transformation. And and this happens in all kinds of ways. So a party often, we do all kinds of talks and different experiences, live music, and we have room for emergent kind of things to happen. But a lot of people on the surface will think, oh, is a party transformative? Of course, ones that have been to transformative parties, we know they are. Like when you have soulful music and everybody feels connected, and you start moving together, this coherence, right? There's like a power that, and you can see it in the smiles of people, you can see it in the energy, and that invites us into like a higher plane of being, collectively, where insights and just like connects us, like when there's this energy, this like battery that we can charge up. Like we leave Burning Man and we're still like high on this energy from events like this. So transformation happens in all kinds of ways, and there's there's so many different stories of, even like many stories of people meeting their partner at Playalchemist that I've heard, and like their soulmates. And
okay,
so
maybe a future programming for dating service, meeting your soulmate. What do you think? What do you think about that?
It could be. Isaiah, who stays at our camp, he's a DJ. He met his partner there. That's the most recent one I heard about. And it's not something that, again, we aim to the outcomes, right? We're just trying to create these conditions, and this sort of comes with what you show up, the space that we're trying to hold there.
I mean, so I'm going to push back a little bit. Let's say you have a particular intention of transformation. If I were you, I would pay attention to the transformational stories and transformational moments, and then capture it somehow with videos or testimonials. If I were you, but obviously I'm not you. So hence the question of like, oh, what kind of transformational stories have you heard or recorded, or being passed around from year to year, that you have heard people say like, oh my God, Playalchemist was the jam. So anyways,
yeah, I guess
that was the question.
I think that's a good thing to maybe explore. I wouldn't be against it, but I don't seek it out, right? It's I think there are a group of campers that are actually trying to capture some more about the camp. I know, and I didn't plan this, but there's a group that wants to do a bit of a documentary on, maybe, I think that includes some of this work. But I guess that's we try to look for outcomes. I'm somewhat disconnected to, those happen, but it's not something you try to really chase. And I'm very much that way, where I don't get too attached on trying to measure the outcomes. You can measure the process of things, you can measure kind of foundations, but that's not something that I actively pursue.
I got you.
Yeah.
So I was speaking to the architect of the 2022 temple architect, right? And then he shared some things with me, which, in our pre-podcast interview, he said it takes about $600,000 to, manifest the design of the temple, and which wasn't surprising, because but it's just something that I don't really think about.
Yeah.
What kind of resources does it take to build something as large and beautiful. So so I wanted to ask you this question because I'm sure you have heard some of the criticisms, outside of Playalchemist who don't really understand, like, oh, why is there such a high camp dues? Or, I heard this is a camp of oil oligarch.
Oh yeah,
Or
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I heard that too.
these type
Uh,
of criticisms and rumors. So if you can address them here, what would you say to them as a point of clarification? Like, well, whatever the Camp Dews or the oil oligarchs or whatever the things, anything that you wanted to share.
yeah. I don't feel like I need to, respond to anything. That's their own alchemy that they're doing, what I think I love about Burning Man though is it's an incredible sandbox. I mean, or dust box, we can call it. You can do whatever you want, right? And I mean, you obviously have to work within the principles, and you have to, but you can create what you want, and there's incredible diversity there. Whatever you, and it's a great learning opportunity. It's a great growth opportunity. But yeah, like the you don't create a camp. I mean, yes, it was a big financial, like I have continued to lose money on the venture. Like as far as, and I wasn't expecting, obviously, from an operations perspective, you try to do it as a cost share, but it is pretty costly, as people could imagine, to to run a camp, like this, if you start to do the math and all the compounding costs of just everything on Playa, like what we pay to rent those projectors and the dust boxes we need to build and the cleaning of everything, just as one very small example. And so we run a cost share on from a perspective, and it often doesn't actually amount out to what we had hoped because of all the surprise costs that come in. But yeah, the stories that people will tell. Well, I am not Russian, I'm Ukrainian,
Yeah.
but I'm in Canada. So, and my dad has his grade 5, and came from a, not an oligarch family, but a lower middle class family in Saskatchewan. And I have also grew my business organically. So I used my own money. The money is actually something that needs to be valued. It has, like, money is energy. And so I view money as energy. So in this regard, like I'm very careful on what I spend my money on. So for me to make this investment in the camp, it was because where it came from, that's why I did it. But I view money as a sacred thing, so it shouldn't be wasted and used for something useful. So that's another thing I can add. I put it, and I think we in today's society, if more people thought that way, that would be really, I think, valuable. And if we take a look at COVID too, there's been an extreme wealth transfer even again. And for what? Like, what value did people create to get that wealth? And we shouldn't get money for free, and this is against alchemical principles, actually. So yeah, I didn't really answer the question, but I shared some perspectives. If you want to maybe ask anything more specific, I may answer it.
Well, I do know plenty of people who visited the camp for the first time, and they're impressed about, like, wow, this is amazing, I want to be a part of it. So, and I told them, well, there's an application process, and I may be able to make some referrals since I know CK and Anna, and they were just curious about, like, okay, great, what is because the camp due is pretty high, right, relative to other camps. So they want to know, like, okay, great, this is like a car, and how do I what kind of accommodations do they receive as a part of the being? in the Camp Alchemist?
Yeah. Well, we have a whole range, so we so we have like it is a spectrum that we offer in, obviously we help subsidize certain, we love to have that diversity, inside the camp, and having artists and all, philosophers and just different creators, shamans. We want to have, a lot of diversity in the camp. So in that we have a range. Now we run and with 3 stages, and all the talks and all, like the sound, and there's a lot of work. So we are a busier camp, and just like, the amount of work that has to happen in a camp, even to the size, like you think of all the people involved. So there's a lot of effort that people do. With that, we do have, we do have very good food, and we have like showers and bathrooms, and very like, you need your nutrition, and especially when you're working so much, and you need,
Actually, on that note, real quick. So
Yeah.
this is not a plug and play camp, right? This is a working camp. Is that correct?
Yeah, people described it as working man before, but that's part of the joy, though. As you know, when you get, there's a lot of satisfaction you get from working with. I mean, first off, there's the build, but then like working, running all of that infrastructure, and like maintaining all that infrastructure for those luxuries, that's all a lot of work. So yeah, and so that's but that's a lot of people, when I hear people's reflections, like they really enjoy, being in the kitchen, or even like greeting people. We have like pyramid greeters, and then like people really, some of the highlights actually come. Even I've heard people have highlights from Mook duty too. So there's a lot of joy that comes from that, but it may not seem so obvious on the surface for people. But
actually, built, in my opinion, is where the magic is at, because sheer hardship, in my opinion, builds that bond. You don't, I think for the people that just show up and oh, Burning Man's awesome, and then they leave without the build, to me they're actually robbing themselves of a deeper lesson, deeper experience, and also opportunity to connect with another human. That's my personal opinion. So I just, I'm glad that you clarified that. This is
we have this goal of creating this this gift for the playa when we build there, and it's an insane amount of work. Like you wake up and you're like exhausted and you're like, the dust storms, the heat, but that's why it's so important for everybody to come together, intrinsically, like, and want to do this, because the pyramid doesn't go together very easily. It was designed a little too precisely, so it's very finicky, and we're a little bit off. So it's not like designed to go together. It's really, something should only have been built once and not taken apart, because each year we have to buy new parts, and like and so it's an insane amount of work. And but you're right, it does build connection, and that sense of accomplishment as a group. And that's part of the experience of Burning Man, is that difficulty. Our build lead, Ian, calls it voluntary hardship.
I like it.
Yeah.
In our camp, chemistic, we call it ecstatic volunteerism.
Yeah.
Similar.
Yeah.
How do you balance, though? Because again, I'm going to bring it back to you as a lead, but I think that's a symbolism of everyone else too. How do you, as a lead, balance that sense of camaraderie by the sheer hardship, and also the catering part? Because people come here not to just work, they also here to enjoy the burn, the vacation, but away from the default world. And then I think from the camp lead's perspective, striking that balance is an important one, because if you just make them work and they're like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. If you just give them the vacation, then they don't have that deeper lesson and deeper experience. How do you find a balance between the two? Or you don't even think about that?
Well, it's something that they have to, we do have like a framework, and obviously when people lead by example, there's that helps set the tone. Uh, but it's really something every individual will go through. I would assume that there's a lot of people that, they don't like the volunteering at the beginning. They hear about it. Oh, I got to do all this volunteering. But then by doing it and going, oh, this is actually a really good experience, right? And this is like, and then they feel like they're part of it. They're not, because Burning Man isn't about being a consumer. It's all co-created, right? Like this camp comes together because of all the people, like I'm one of the many that, are creating this, but it's like, it wouldn't be there if everybody didn't show up and do all the work for free, right? And well, I shouldn't say for free. You're actually paying to work. So do you want to pay to volunteer? So it's like another edge on top of it, right?
So on that note, quick question there. Oh, I'm just playing a part. All right. I paid X dollars and now you're asking me to work, like it's too much work. How do you address a common complaint? One assumes someone who's used to the comfortable lifestyle.
Yeah. I mean, when you get certain virgin burners that come and they maybe have some sort of expectation, it's what, I am there to hold space for that discussion if somebody gets to that situation where they maybe are trying to understand it. So, but I don't have any answers for them. I can just, question them. But I've had people that, have go, well, I spent this money, therefore I should X, have some kind of expectation. That has happened. It's just a process of them understanding it, and so I'll just question them along the way, and it works out. It seemed to have worked out to do it that way. So
got it. And then if they don't comply, is there consequences? So in other camps, what they do is, hey, if they're not a good citizen of the camp, and
yes, there are people that don't get invited.
But
that do not come back. Often though, what's interesting is when we hold to our principles, they don't even want, it's like a magnet, like they just go somewhere else. Or so you often don't have to have a conversation about that because it just sort of takes care of itself. They typically would know. And and getting back to like, I would question about like, what were they, when people have an expectation, there's always a learning there for themselves. Well, what were you expecting? Well, what did you think this was? Right. So questioning is always a great way. And that's all part, where they can discover. And in there's an alchemical little gem for their own frame. Because often that's a frame in which people see the world, right? They see the world as transactional often. It's like, I'm paying for this, I expect this. That actually takes you away from your higher frame, like that frame would be a synchronicity disruptor as an example, because you already have this expectation formed. And so the questions can go, I can usually get at, what might be, an opportunity for them to, identify something to work on.
What do you see as the dream for Playalchemist? Because it's been going on, this is the fourth year, right? And it's now seemingly to find its flow. You can get things done by Tuesday instead of Wednesday or Thursday. And what's the dream?
Well, we're gonna bring kind of whoever wants to join to have a discussion, but like this is now kind of taking on a life of its own. And we'll see what I really I think I don't have a particular dream at all for it. I still don't even know exactly why I was supposed to create it. So it's like, so it will make itself known, you know, and maybe it just runs its course and it withers away like so much of like we do, or maybe it takes on a life of its own, or maybe there's something that just continues to go. I don't know. I don't really much sure, but each year, like, it's great to sort of, you know, it evolves, and I think there's an essence that's forming, and so I'm assuming it's going to continue on at least for a while.
I mean, just based on my friends who visited Playalchemist for the first time as first-time burners, it's one of the monuments at Burning Man that really left an impression for them. Because one of my typical questions for integration after Burning Man is, what are your top, you know, lessons that you got? You know, what are your highlights and lowlights of Burning Man? And they often refer to Playalchemist.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And they had a moment there, and then they will say something about that. It doesn't matter what walks of life they are, just it made an impression for them. So if that's any measure of success, I would say you have successfully imprinted a transformational moment for my friends. And then from then to you, thank you, sir, for doing that.
Well, yeah, thanks for sharing it. And around transformation too, what came up for me while you were speaking is often when people think of transformation, they think of trauma, and, you know, something, you know, like that's the catalyst. If you want to transform, you need something traumatic. And everything sits in this like duality. And the other aspect of that is a peak experience. And this is what we have at Burning Man, is these peak experiences. And they are coupled with trauma. So there's a complementarity there. But peak experiences, I think, is something we need to create more in the world, because these will help us, you know, move to our higher selves. And that's, I think, one of the things at Burning Man that happens a lot is we have the possibility or the opportunity for more peak experiences, which always shed light on yourself and helps you, you know, gives you more faith in life, but also helps you be a better human.
So I actually just had a question from a friend texting me. She wants me to ask you what you believe is the Philosopher's Stone. I don't know if you have any comments there, but she wants to know that.
Well, the Philosopher's Stone is the elixir of life in alchemy, and so it's designed to give you immortal life. And so it had a physical representation. It was typically red, and alchemists would carry it in this little pouch, and it was an agent that could transform, you know, metals into gold. But again, that was more of like a metaphor in it. Now, a stone, I can go back to your story. You talked about those three aspects of yourself that you work on. That's four. Okay, so those four together, in alchemy, these if you were to purify those four and you unify those together, and so actually, four is the four elements also symbolize the four elements that you go together. So air, earth, you know, water, fire. You purify these to their highest essences. Those come together. The fifth element is also known as the Philosopher's Stone, and it's the unification of those pure substances that come together. And this is what will give you infinite life, you know, according to alchemy. And so that inner work will lead you to that path. And there is like what's called a lesser stone along the way. That's in the material realm. And so like, it's not a, you know, it's a whole evolutionary journey. And so there is like a time when you will master the material realm. And this is where goals and objectives can sometimes, you know, be part of that path. But the like the if you look at the well, I talked about the Magician Tarot card, which is also the Alchemist. The journey is that you go in life and you master the material realm, the lower realm, and then you come in and you master the above realm of spirit. Then you come back into the center. And the magician in the tarot card has 1 foot in the above realm, 1 foot in the below realm. He's standing kind of like this, one hand up. And this shows that he has mastered both the above and the below realms, and he's able to bring those 2 realms together. Another way, if you want to take a quantum perspective on this, E equals mc squared, matter and energy are actually the same thing. They're interchangeable, right? You can create, out of pure energy, you can create matter and vice versa, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a very deep principle, even from a quantum perspective, which is just, like I say, fascinating to know that. So the Philosopher's Stone is tapping to that infinite self, finding that part of you that's not finite, it's infinite, that energy being. So I would say that, I perhaps, the ones that, we read about, like the Buddhas of the world that have got the state of enlightenment, they're probably found that Philosopher's Stone.
So you're a serious experimenter, or seeker, or scholar, practitioner. What methods have you come across that would get people out of that stuckness, right? That accelerate the process of alchemy that you've come across?
If I were to maybe share one thing, I think understanding the operations. So there's 7 operations. Again, they're in our talisman. I'll go through them briefly, but understanding the basic operations. And there's lots of different books that are available. Actually, one of them I could probably recommend. It's a bit of it's an easier read. Well, actually, so I was going to say Dennis William Hulk. He has this book called The Emerald Tablet. It goes a bit into the history of alchemy. It goes into the operations and its purpose. But another book that
Emerald what?
The Emerald Tablet.
Tablet.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good. It's almost. It's not Alchemist for Dummies or Alchemy for Dummies, but it's very digestible. Like reading Jung is very dense, and it's not what I. There's a lot of depth there, but it's not very digestible. But the other thing is the book from Paulo Coelho is The Alchemist, which a lot of people have read. It's a book you can reread. It's a very short book, but the formula of the alchemical transformation is actually in story. It's in allegory, it's in metaphor, it's in that storyline, the whole journey, even back to self, right? At the beginning, if you recall the book, go to the pyramid and you'll find your treasure, right? And then of course that's not the treasure. He goes back home and discovers that it's inside of him, but he needs to go on the journey in order to discover it. And so it's actually it's a great story because it reminds you, remember I was talking about that subtleness, it reminds you how to sort of be in the world, and it does it in a beautiful story form. But yeah, the 7 operations I think is a really useful tool. I'll often reflect and go, oh, where am I? Because if you're dissolving something away, you can be intentional around that, and just like doing that work, the solitude that you need, the reflection that you need. There's tools in each of the operations, like what happened, and and instead of just jumping to the next thing, and then being in, knowing when you are, bringing a new self together, you're reassembling yourself, knowing that that too is a process, and that, and then being very aware of allowing that emergence to happen, not having any expectations. So knowledge of each of the operations and how to show up is very, very helpful. And that's what alchemists, again, thought. They thought by studying nature and understanding these patterns, they could accelerate that, their own evolution.
Is it, so that's understanding of the framework, which I got the, playalchemist.com/alchemy right there in front of me. right? So but that's content. But what about the practices? Is it contemplative? Is it specific kind of meditation? Is it ayahuasca journeys? Because the different tools will allow you different experiences, and then it's about choosing the tool.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know if you say like, oh, this particular modalities, this particular meditation, this
Yeah.
particular,
Well,
you know.
there all of these different tools are applicable, at different and certain ones for certain times are more applicable. So that's a yes to all of them. I think it's also a very personal thing for each. I think you can allow to see what kind of calls you too, from what meditation practice you might have, and or ayahuasca. I haven't done ayahuasca, but I do think, and from people that I've talked to, it's something that calls you. It's like, hey, it's like there's maybe a time, and so following those, that intuition, I think, is really, really important. I like, there's all the basics that I'm sure everybody knows, but we have to, like, the self-care part is really important, and knowing like just that in was mentioned, that triad of like salt, sulfur, mercury. Salt is the body, so purifying the body, like that's a good place to start if you're out of balance. If is all of the foundations of that, which include your mental hygiene, where meditation comes in, and your physical practices. For me, if I had to share something that is important for me, and it may not be for everybody, it's I competed in martial arts, and I would find that when I was fighting, I was going to this really special place. And again, it's in you don't have time to think, so it's like an ultimate kind of flow hammer, just like get into flow now, or get your get your head kicked in, right? So consequences are high. Like if you look at Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's kind of design of flow, like it kind of checks a lot of the boxes, but I would need something that forces me in there. So like rock climbers probably get into flow because like they got no choice, right? It's like consequently you're free climbing. So fighting was the same thing. And then I retired, and I all of a sudden felt I lost something. I lost some kind of energy inside of me, and I just wasn't like my higher self. I was losing some energetic capabilities. And then I went, a friend took me mountain biking, and he took me up what would be the equivalent of like a black diamond. I climbed up. Maybe he thought it was like, I think he was actually having some fun with me. So I go down this technical thing, and I'm flying. Somehow I didn't fall, but I just barely survived it. But I had that feeling back. That feeling that it like, wow, I'm back there, and it felt good. I mean, it took me there. And so this is an example, and Jung actually has this in his red book. He says sometimes we need like an outer adventure that triggers an inner adventures. And sometimes you need an event that catalyzes you, tosses you into that space. Like golf would never do that. I need something that has consequences. So mountain biking is great because, like, again, overconfident, underconfident, it will all teach you, and you can get seriously hurt. So it would take me to this place, which is an embodiment, right? This is a teacher of how you need to be in the world, and you need to practice it. So your body practices just at the root, and then there's practices for the spirit and practices for the soul. That would be different. But again, they're all interrelated. And
so I wanna say a little bit more. I'm a male body person. I'm a guy, and to me, it's really important for men to take that level of risk that you talked about.
Yeah.
And then when we do that, we're at the edge of risk, not jumping over the cliff, but at the edge, and we'll feel truly alive.
Yeah.
So do you think that's a requirement that's necessary to really get to the essence of being a man? Since we're both men, so I don't know what's it like to be a woman, so I can
Yeah,
speak for them.
yeah,
Do
yeah.
you feel that that's an important component?
I do. I do. Again, just only looking at my own personal like masculinity. I think you know, I do know, like in talking to women, like for example, dance can be a really, and that's a very embodiment type of experience too. Dance, I have in talking to women, I have also taken them to places that sound the same. Of course, men and women do the same kind of sports, but there is like men are more assertive, right? Like we historically were the hunters and the fighters, and there's something there that taps into something, but maybe we will transcend that at some point. I'm not sure, but yeah, for me, I do feel more whole when I do these things, like, and definitely like, yeah, the archetype of being a man, like when you're doing these physical things seems to elevate.
You don't practice martial arts anymore, yeah?
No, I retired. It was I will mess around a little bit, but I retired. I did it for a super long time, and it was really wonderful. But it was like I was in the I my last fight, I was fighting this guy a lot bigger than me, and I remember I just I would the previous competition, I was able to push myself forward to the edge, but I'm like, I wasn't, you know, I just didn't have that same source to like go and win, because I was fighting, this, generally younger guys that really, have, they want to win. And yeah, and I felt like, okay, I thought it was time to move on. And I loved it though. It was an incredible teacher for me. And but not something that's sustainable. I don't, getting hit isn't that healthy, and especially
Nope.
as you get older.
That's for the brain.
Yeah,
It's
exactly. And
terrible.
I really worked, like I was very motivated not to get kicked or punched in the head. So that was highly motivating for me, but
Mhm.
it was yeah, it was the right time for me to go.
What about like other replacements, like say jujitsu, or maybe even, I don't know, shadow boxing or some kind of the
Yeah,
things,
yeah,
or
like I found it in mountain biking, like
mm,
I will still mess around a bit, and I've even sparred a bit, like with people that are more advanced that know how to control themselves.
yeah.
But uh yeah, I found it in mountain biking was mine. I think there's a lot of, and the reason that works for me, because living in Vancouver, I can just take my bike and go. So it's very accessible, and it's right here, and it's here every day of the year. I will go out in the rain. It doesn't matter.
I'm asking specifically about the martial art practices is this because you were at a really advanced level. You were the captain of the national team, right? So
Yeah,
it's, I think that speaks something about your skill level.
yeah.
And I I wasn't at that level, but I practice martial arts, but I don't maintain my flexibility.
Yeah.
And then and it's one of those things, you don't use it, you lose it. So hence why the question, like, do you even just practicing a little bit, even if you don't spar,
Yeah.
to just keep the skills that you have, or like, now I'm retired from this, I have now graduated, mountain biking is the thing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I stay active in a lot of ways, and I but we, especially, over 50, it's like a deterioration. So it's just a constant. So we just try to maintain, but we, as we age as men, we lose it. So there's no way we can keep it. I also had a series of injuries. My favorite kick. What martial art did you do?
I did a number of different things. So
Okay.
specifically Hapkido.
Okay. Yeah.
And
That's
then I
pretty interesting.
dabble in like jujitsu, boxing, all kinds
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
little things. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Hapkido would have had the axe kick as part of the repertoire, if you remember that. That's
A
what you
what kick?
axe kick. You bring your leg up and you drop it down.
Uh-huh. Yep. Yep.
Very ballistic movement. But I love that kick because I could essentially, it's a very powerful kick. And if you can like, it'll cause people to keep distance from you. If you know, so I would loft and I would frame my fights with that, you know, like because I could pull it up quickly, drop it down really fast. And people are like, whoa. But with that kick, I was really fast when I was younger, but then I eventually, it's a ballistic movement and I would really like whip it. And ended up getting micro tears and ended up tearing both my hamstrings. And so those tears then they didn't repair, and I still have decent flexibility, but it shortened, and the strength, you know, weakened, and so injuries too were piling up, and I was losing some of my really powerful tools, and that would have just continued down, and you know, that's and my muscle memory still wanted to do what my, you know, even 18-year-old self wanted to do. And meanwhile, I'm like 38 at that time. It didn't, it wasn't. Now you still see a lot of older, like mixed martial arts, but you don't see them doing these advanced techniques.
Yeah.
Physically, you know, they're more risky and they require more athleticism that are associated with, you know, younger ages. Like even George St. Pierre, you know, he did more technical techniques when he was younger, and he went down, you know, kept it at the basics as he got older. And it's also conserving energy. There's more reasons than that.
Exactly.
But yeah, so I was okay to go because it's just a constant, you know, recalibration, and I liked the fighting, and but again, I didn't like getting punched or kicked in the head at the same time.
Yep, everyone has a plan until you
Yeah.
get punched in the face.
Yeah, that is a great Mike Tyson quote. But you know, there's one thing that's great about fighting. There's no bullshit. Like in life, if you make a mistake and you get punched in the face, you got real-time feedback. One thing I've observed about life, often people will make mistakes and they don't pay the consequences. Like this is what I loved about fighting. Like, you know, it's real and the feedback is now. And often in life, like people could do something where they should get punched in the face, but they don't. And maybe it happens years later. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, but I love the real-time feedback of that. And I try to actually give feedback as much as I can like that, you know, in the moment.
I want to talk to you about your book, Entrepreneur. You talked about different stages of ego development, and circling back to what you talked about, hiring over 1,000 people. My big lesson from being the chief culture officer of a company of 250 people is this. In the very beginning, we wanted to be a uniform, a small team of Navy SEALs, effectively. So we treated everyone the same. But then I mature as we grew the size of the company from 50 to 100, 150, 200, 250. Then I realized, okay, that single approach it breaks down after very quickly. Then it's about, and the new metaphor that I thought of is now we're creating an ecosystem of humans. How do we have the entire ecosystem thrive? People are at different stages effectively. So if you don't mind speaking about the different stages of ego development, that would be really great for other entrepreneurs, camp organizers, you know, people who are curating the ecosystem of people.
Yeah, we describe our like Chrysalis as an ecosystem of companies, but then each you know, each company will have people at all different kinds of levels, and as well as teams. Like there's levels of maturity of teams that as it takes a while for teams to become coherent, right? You talk about the Navy SEALs team, like that's probably an advanced team that has incredible trust, but they also know each other well, and they're able to move like one unit rather than, you know, fragmented. So there's real value in keeping teams. And so within any company, you'll have different teams that are different levels of maturity, you can say, and with that maturity comes capability. And you can have also, teams that are been around for a long time that are also maybe at a lower function because they haven't done the work of building that trust and that coherence, and and even the natural process of that complementary skill sets that you need. Ego development, there's not really, like, I don't really view it as a stage aspect. Like there's different human development frameworks that kind of started with Piaget's work. There's in some ways Maslow is a bit of a human development framework. The ones that are quite prevalent right now that are deeply researched, I like Robert Kegan's 5 levels of human development, and that's cognitive development. And then another one that is even more robust is spiral dynamics, which was originally created by Claire Graves, but there's been a lot of people contributing to it, and Ken Wilber did some philosophical work on it. And are you probably familiar with spiral dynamics?
I'm a big fan. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll give and are you familiar with Kegan's model of like the socialized mind, the self-authoring mind, the self-transforming mind?
I read it in your
blog post,
business needs to grow up.
Yeah. So Kegan's second tier deals with ego development. Ego development in spiral dynamics is really supposed to happen at the lower levels, accumulating in red. So like really we're really should deal with our ego development in the sense that we've got a strong foundation. The ego is still present, of course, but we've transcended the hungry ghost that really needs to achieve, at an adolescent level. But this is not what's happening, in society so much. We have, and part of it is that we sometimes don't let the ego go out and play when we're young, and so we suppress it, and then it has to come out later. Or the ego, with our systems, like think of external incentives. This is not helpful for ego development when they're very direct and they don't consider the whole. They don't consider extrinsic, effects of things. So external incentives can also very much drive ego. So our systems socialize an unhealthy ego development. And if looking at the lens of spiral dynamics, I feel that we have unhealthy ego development, and it's being expressed, if you recall, like that the traditional like orange, and then you've got green, which kind of associated with postmodern or modernism. We have unhealthy egos, so like red, that's manifesting in both orange and green. So we have red, orange, red, green, because of the unhealthy ego development that our systems have perpetuated, our parenting styles, and so this to me is a bit of a root problem that I've observed. If you recall Amber and spiral dynamics, that really doesn't exist so much anymore. It exists in the other systems because Amber was the like the metaphor is the army. It's like this was when we had very rigid hierarchical systems, both in work, that were very conformative, like for example, in World War II, the Germans were very much a hierarchical society. So they were the most educated, but yet, they still needed to follow the authority because, we didn't have the internet back then. And so the teachers, they were the smartest, like they had the best educational system, but they would look for that authority, which, is a socialized behavior because of hierarchy. We're now in our educational system socializing for green, and so kids are right away in most, going, right to green, depending on their background. And so this is why, the ego that sees things as absolutist, that always wants to be satisfied, always wants more, never, this is to me why it's a real root problem in our society today.
Wait, what is the root problem?
The unhealthy ego development. So, and then allowing these ego people that, because the ego wants to be seen, wants to achieve, they're also seeking power in our society. And so that combination is a very unhealthy combination for our future.
Okay, so inside of that, knowing the macro structural that we're in green, and also knowing that unhealthy ego development is the root of the problems that we see in society.
Yeah, we're in polarities of like traditional and postmodern. So we're actually in culture wars. But the common thing is the unhealthy ego development, where we see the extremism on each side, where it's kind of being seen as absolute. And so like in spiral dynamics, we should really be like, there's the second tier, which is like yellow, teal and turquoise, but this is when you start to understand the paradox. You start to understand more of a systems view, and you see that there's partial truths in each of these, and like teal, for example, is the ability to actually integrate them. Yellow sees them, understands them. Teal actually integrates them into a whole, which is like complementarity, which is like even rooted in alchemy, bringing these opposites together into a unified whole. And so
instead of that, this podcast, I'm very much a Taoist, right? I don't believe in,
nice.
Yeah, I'm very much in, I don't believe in one polarity, positive polarity or negative polarity. I believe that's the answer is contextual and lies in somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
So it's hard. It is hard for me to give an absolute answer to something, and it really annoys some of the people and audience people if they don't embrace this integrated approach to life. So inside of that, how do you, sir, someone who creates containers, whether it be business or camps, to create an environment that works for every one of your participants?
I've got a visitor here. Yeah. Well, you're going into another question, but as you can see, my family and my son are home. But this whole subject of like this is a rabbit hole in itself. But at the root of it, though, it's really opening and inviting people in to their own journey, their own authenticity, their own, in Keegan's model, self-authoring. And so I believe our systems play a really big role in supporting that. And then when people, like when ego, as it well, go astray, we as a society co-regulate that. And so we want
wait. One more time. That sentence, one more time.
We co-regulate. So we need to offer that reflection back, and together allow for that learning and then integration, and allow the ego to be seen. And sometimes it's not ready to be seen. So it's a subject that I've been fascinated with, and I've seen how people that are I've seen unhealthy egos continue to be perpetuated. I started writing a series of articles around tying it to spiral dynamics and trying to really identify the problem, and see if, just to really start a dialogue about what are the solutions, for this. And I've certainly got, some ideas, but I'm really trying to understand this a lot better.
Beautiful. Well, let's do a part 2 on this. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your truth. I know we went longer, but I think that's a sign of a good conversation. Christopher, I really appreciate you. Enjoy the rest of your family time.